So let's take the most classic of all examples of externalities, which is pollution. So this is a clear example of a negative externality. Negative meaning that the effect that this good has on other people is negative, it hurts them more than it helps them. So the production of some goods has a bad effect on people, regardless of whether they themselves are buying it or not. If the production of some sort of good leaves you with some pollution, the effect of that pollution will be felt by everybody, or at least everybody in a particular region, regardless of whether or not they personally bought it. Okay, so think about if you're somebody who's living in a remote village out in the middle of nowhere, and you don't use electricity, you don't use gas, and you have all old school stuff from 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and yet you're still going to feel the effects of pollution that is created by people who are not you, right? So that is a negative externality. You had nothing to do with this decision, it's market, and yet you are being affected by it. And we can immediately see how that's going to lead to a problem, right? Because me living in my remote village, right, having no control over this situation whatsoever, I'm being harmed. I am paying a marginal cost of this good. And yet, when people are making the decision about how much of this good to consume or produce, they're only considering their marginal costs, not mine. So there's an additional cost that's being borne that is not being recognized by the people who are making the decision. So they're going to act as though the good is cheaper than it actually is, right? There's a cost being levied here, but it's on someone else. So I'm not going to make my decision on that basis. So this is referred to as an external cost. You can also call this an additional social cost. This is a cost that is borne externally to the market. People who are in the market are not the ones who are paying this cost. So if you want to understand what is society's idea of an efficient level of outcome for this good, well, you have to incorporate those external costs into your idea of what society's costs are. Before the midterm, I said, what is society's marginal cost of producing a good? Well, it's whatever the resources we have to give up in order for it to be produced, which is the same as the producer's marginal cost, because they're the ones who are paying to produce it, right? Now, part of that stays the same, right? We would still say that the society's marginal cost is the cost of resources that we have to give up in order to produce that good. However, with an externality in play, that is no longer entirely captured by what the producer has to pay. Right? If the producer has to pay $5 to, burn a tire for energy or whatever, then yeah, the producer's marginal cost is $5. And if that causes $1 worth of damage to somebody else, the producer's marginal cost is still $5, but the social cost, the social marginal cost is $6, right? Because you have to incorporate that additional cost. But the producer's going to choose based on the 5, and so it's going to act like the good is cheaper to produce than it actually is. But what happens when costs are lower than they actually should be? We're going to get more quantity. So we're going to introduce the idea of a marginal social cost, right? So marginal social cost is the direct cost to produce the good, which is the standard marginal cost, plus whatever marginal cost is imposed on the rest of society. So if the producer's paying $5 to burn the tire, right? That is the direct cost that they are paying, right? So that's $5 for them. That's the private marginal cost that the producer pays, plus the $1 of damage that it does to somebody else. So the social marginal cost in that case would be the 5 that the producer pays, plus the $1 in damage that somebody else pays, for a total of 6. So let's put this on our graph. So we know that the supply curve represents the marginal cost of the good, specifically the marginal cost of the good to the producer. We also know it only incorporates that producer's costs, because it's all about what decision the producer is going to make. And they only care about their own costs. And so on top of that, we're going to sort of stack up how much additional cost is imposed on other people by the production of this good, right? So if we start here, let's say this is the 10th unit, how much does it cost the producer to make? Maybe that's going to be $15. If that causes $3 worth of damage, that's an additional $3. We go from 15 to 18. We stack the marginal social cost sort of up on top. This time, by the way, we are going up and not left or right, because we are sort of adding on to the marginal cost itself. Right. In addition to the marginal social cost, we have marginal social benefit. It's a very similar idea, right? So I've been giving the example of pollution, where clearly the externality that we're talking about is negative. There's probably not a lot of people for whom pollution benefits other than the people doing the polluting. There's probably some instances, right? If you're in Alaska now, you can, I don't know, own a sunflower farm or something. But on the other, but there are external benefits as well, right? This is not a one-sided thing. There are also external benefits for goods in general. So we have a marginal social benefit, just like we have a marginal social cost. Not just the benefits that are born to the people who buy and consume the good, but also the benefits to everybody else as well, right? So whatever benefit I get from consuming the good, then that's something. Whatever benefit somebody else gets from me consuming that good, that's another thing. We add them together, we get the marginal social benefit. So to give an example, let's say I'm thinking about buying a tree for my yard, right? I'm gonna buy a tree. How much value am I gonna get from that tree? Let's say I'm gonna get, I don't know, $100 worth of value from that tree. So my private benefit, my marginal benefit is gonna be 100 from buying the tree. But trees look nice. So tree grows in my yard, grows up real big, looks nice. People like walking by it and looking at it. Let's say it brings an extra $5 of value just from people walking along and enjoying the sight of the tree. That's an external benefit. Okay. So what is the marginal social benefit of this tree? Well, it's the $100 that I get plus the $5 of value that everybody else gets as well. So it'd be 105 in that case for the marginal social benefit. It includes my benefit. It's not just the external benefit, but it also incorporates everybody else too. So, what benefit is granted to society as a result of the production, purchase, and use of that unit, of that good? We take that same idea. Here's the demand curve, which represents the marginal benefit, and that's just the private marginal benefit. That's just me liking my own tree, and then we add on top of that, again going up and not left or right, to get to the marginal social benefit, which is going to be the benefit to society as a whole for producing. We've got marginal social costs, we've got marginal social benefit, and this is going to reorient our idea of what efficiency is. Now, really, nothing's actually changing. It's just that we've been making some shortcuts before that we are no longer allowing ourselves to make. So we need to consider a wider range of costs when thinking about whether or not an outcome is efficient. We can't just pay attention to the private cost of benefits. We need to pay attention to the marginal social cost of benefits. And truly, these were already on the graph before that we were working on. It's just that when we didn't have an externality, when we were just regular supply and demand, we would just say that demand was the same thing as marginal social benefit, and supply was the same thing as marginal social cost, right? Because how do we get from supply to marginal social cost? We add up the external benefit on top. If there's no external benefit, then there's nothing to add. We just end up in the same place we started with, right? Same thing with marginal social benefit. If there's no external benefit, there's nothing to add, and so we just end up at the same place we started with. So we've been doing this all along. It's just we didn't draw it on the graph explicitly. So when we're incorporating the fact that there might be some external costs and benefits, to get efficiency, we want marginal social cost equal marginal social benefit. Again, it's the same thing we had before. We want society's marginal cost to equal society's marginal benefit. Again, if there's no external costs or benefits, if we're in regular old supply and demand land, that's the same thing we had before. Marginal social cost equals marginal social benefit. With no externalities, that's just supply meets demand. So this gives us to the efficient outcome, because from society's point of view, total surplus is maximized. We have produced all the units for which somebody values it more than it costs, keeping in mind all of the value that it brings to everybody and all of the costs that it imposes on it. This is the golden rule for society as a whole. So if we're talking about a rule with no externalities, this is the exact same thing we've been doing before. Now we're just going to allow those lines to sort of differ a little bit and see what happens. So here is our optimal. I'm going to put QO on it for optimal. You can do whatever. And that's going to happen where marginal social cost meets marginal social benefit. That is where social efficiency is maximized. We are efficient. Our total surplus is as big as it can be. Right? How big is total surplus? Same thing as before. It's the area below the marginal social benefit, above the marginal social cost. Producer and consumer surplus are a little bit harder to figure out, but total surplus works the same. Okay, so far so good. Where the marginal social cost and marginal social benefit cross is going to be our efficient outcome. Easy enough. But now the question is, what's going to happen if we allow the market to run as normal? We have a competitive market, and instead of picking this outcome, which how would we do that, right? Society doesn't get to pick like this; it doesn't make a choice in that way. We let the competitive market do its thing. Where are we going to end up? So remember, here is where the supply and demand were before. So if the market is allowed to go as normal, it will choose its regular old place where supply meets demand, because that is where the marginal benefit and marginal cost meet for individuals, right? That's where the individuals are going to say, I don't want to buy anymore, I don't want to sell anymore, but I do want to buy and sell this amount. So where supply and demand cross, that is going to be our competitive market quantity. I'll mark that QC. You can call it whatever you want. Now we can see that this is going to give us a dead weight loss. It's a bit harder to figure out than before, but it's the same idea. If you think it through logically, you'll come to the right conclusion. So what's going on here? The dead weight loss is the surplus that we lose because we are not at the efficient quantity, right? So what surplus are we losing by being at the competitive market quantity instead of the efficient quantity? Well, here's where we start. Here's the efficient quantity. And we're gonna buy and sell more units, even though they're not efficient, right? Every time we do, we are adding on this much cost and we're adding on this much cost and this much benefit. The costs are higher than the benefits, so every time we add another unit, we add on a little bit more cost than we do benefit, and surplus goes down. How much does surplus go down by? Well, we've added this much in costs and we've added this much in benefits, so the difference between them, that's how much we are losing. So the dead weight loss is between marginal social cost and marginal social benefit over the units that we probably shouldn't be buying and selling. So that's the competitive market quantity. It's where supply and demand cross. So that's the quantity we get if we just let the competitive market do its thing.